we talked a little bit about Bolsheviks and who Bolsheviks are, who they were, and that's all well and good. We all know there was a revolution. We all know there was a takeover, and in that takeover there were a handful of people who died. Now, we have been fed in the United States by Western historians. You see all the red flags waving and the funny-looking people with beards and that, and all the smoke from the gunpowder in the streets, and this violent usurpation of power by those Bolshevik creeps. And none of that's true. In fact, the Bolsheviks were a democratic party. Majority won. Lenin did not run the party. Lenin lost more times in votes than he won. And that's why things didn't happen the way he wanted to. Now, when we come to the United States, how does that apply? Well, so all that happens, so what? Well, we had communists in the United States long before there were communists in Russia. Russia was new on the scene. The true communists didn't want communists in one country, which is what Stalin finally called Soviet communism, communism in one country. It was for some power purposes. Communists, Marxists, have always wanted a world, workers of the world unite. If you haven't heard that, that goes back to Marx. So they had internationals. There was the first international, the second international, and I think we're up to the fifth international now. All these little groups, little communist groups belong to them. We have them here in the country. And then communists are broken up too, like any other groups. There are Bolsheviks, there are Leninists, there are Maoists, there are Trotskyites. They just go on and on, but they're all really basically the same. The differences are for their own little internal purposes. Well, the first international came to the United States and had their offices. This is world communism in 1872 in New York City. The first Communist Party in the United States was in 1876, and that party still exists today. It's not the one Communist Party USA, Bolshevik. But it's the first Communist Party and is here today, still on the books. We've had lots and lots of communists here for a very, very long time. And if you say that communism really didn't begin until the late 1890s in Russia, then we beat them by a couple decades. So we were up and going, but we were a whole different ballgame than the Tsarist Russia and our free America as we know it. There's one thing about communists, and my friend Bill's not his real name, but my friend said, a communist will knock on 100 doors a day, and if he gets one person to listen, it's a great success. They were spit on, kicked, you name it, it happened to them, but they were dedicated. The second thing is, not in their lifetime. They never believed that it would happen in their lifetime. They were dedicated to generations of workers for communists. That's in this country. About the turn of the century, not this century, but the last century, 20th century, unions began to become strong and to be communist controlled. Then we know that Roosevelt came in. Roosevelt, people call him a socialist. Well, okay, I take that. That means he's a communist. He came in with socialist security. And we know what that is. The government, you pay the government a little bit of money and the government's going to take care of you. It was a bad economic investment and it's not looking like it's so great now. Also, Roosevelt had lots and lots of legislation he was putting into place. Most of it was rejected. All Marxist stuff. A lot of communists in the government. The ACLU working along. We already said they're communists. Roosevelt proposed an interesting thing in on January 11, 1944, which was his last State of the Union. And he proposed that we have a political Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments. He is proposing a pure Marxist economic Bill of Rights. And you can listen to him, you can look it up online, you can listen to him. He did it from the White House because he just came back from Yalta and dealing with Stalin, and he wasn't feeling too good. Of course, he died a little bit later. So here's what was in the economic Bill of Rights. You might see that this is kind of similar to what we're hearing now. Roosevelt's economic Bill of Rights, the right to a useful and well-paying job. It's a right, not to a job, but a useful and a well-paying job. Now, these are all code. They don't really mean anything. They mean we're going to control it all. The right to adequate food and clothing and recreation. You have a right to go to the Black Sea on a communist-sponsored ship and have your vacation there. That was done all the time. Well, that's what Roosevelt said you had a right to. The right of every farmer to raise his products. We're going to give the land back to the farmers, and that's right in the Bolsheviks, right along with it in our economy. The right to a good home, even if you can't afford one. Guys, that sounds familiar. Mortgages, oh, you don't have a job? That's all right, just sign here, we'll give you a house. You can lose it, but the right to free medical care, the right to free education, the right to be free from economic fears of growing old, getting sick, having an accident, or being unemployed. Those were to be put into law as absolute rights that every person had. And that's not hard to carry out. If you remember, the Russians say they pretended like they paid us and we pretended like we worked. They will take care of you from cradle to grave. They will make all the money. They will have all the property. They will have all the wealth. They're super capitalists. Those people in Russia didn't get the benefit of their labor, which is what Marx said they should have. That was never even anticipated. So those didn't pass, but suddenly in the 60s, things began to change. FHA was changing, and then we had Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac coming up, although Fannie Mae started a little earlier. We had all the banking regulations. We had all of these beginnings of a good, strong communist approaching economy. And that's where we get into this chaos again. We're gonna tear the economy up. We're gonna loan to people who don't have any money. We're going to have giant economic problems. Things are gonna go bad to worse, to worse, to worse, and they have done just that. The 60s were really those 40 years were the real final Bolshevik operating tactics in the United States. It was no longer just the little communist knocking on doors. It was the Bolshevik taking over. And we'll look at what that did and how it came about in just a minute.